Hello all, this is the Owl, and oh man am I excited. So, as you all requested on our recent poll, today we'll be looking at a dark manga. A very dark manga. One that stayed with me for weeks after finishing it, all 3 times that I've read this thing, and one that I consider a must-read. A must-read that nobody I know has even read. But let's start at the beginning. And yeah, I apologize for the long intro here. It's going to be a long video once I put this all together. What does dark even mean in this context? Does dark mean gory, bloody, gruesome? Well, no. This, for instance, has almost zero gore, but is utterly horrific. This has a ton of gore, but isn't disturbing in the least. Does dark mean relentlessly squicky, depressing, or mean-spirited? You know, the sort of thing that screams out, "Be disturbed." Also, no, because you get used to this stuff after a while. Desensitized. At worst, you're left feeling mildly sick. For instance, this is, to me, way darker than this, even though the latter is one of the most unpleasantly squicky things I had seen at the time. And yes, if you hear any noises, it's our furnace. I can't help that, I'm afraid. But as I was saying, in my opinion, to be truly dark, a story needs to have some sort of impact other than, "You gross" or "Ow, my fingernails." It needs to be something that doesn't just go to bed with you. It wakes up next to you, cooks you breakfast, and drives you to work the next day. And a big part of that, as I mentioned in my Made in Abyss video recently, is contrast. Likeable characters, a compelling mystery, and you know what? I should probably stop this before I start giving plot points away here. Believe it or not, my initial intention was to cover Brad Hurley's Coach, but after reading that again, I found that I didn't really have much of interest to say aside from, yeah, that story will rot your soul. And yeah, the horrible twist was predictable, and also yeah, Hiroaki Samura might actually have a genuine problem with women. And it takes a lot for me to level that accusation, but cheese and rice, is that not a fun read? Instead, today, we'll be taking a look at the infamous but somewhat obscure Satougashi no Dangan wa Uchinukenai, which is often referred to as a Lollipop or a Bullet in English, and I'm not sure why, as the Japanese title translates as something closer to "a candy bullet cannot penetrate anything." It's one hell of a ride, so much so that I am going to have to say this right off the bat. If you haven't read this thing, turn off this video right now, go and track it down and read it yourself. I cannot express how bloody good this one is. Now, I'll be referring to this as Satougashi this time, as both of the existing titles are somewhat cumbersome, and also because Satougashi sounds a little bit like Higurashi, which I suspect it might be making a few nods to here and there, as tonally, the 2 stories do share some common ground. And yes, we will be starting that Higurashi deep dive at 10,000 subscribers, and yes, past self, you are a braying jackass for promising that. Seriously, it's gonna be longer than Made in Abyss is gonna turn out to be. Also, for those who continue watching, I am going to be structuring these videos a little differently. Rather than doing one big discussion at the start. Yeah, this intro's long, I know. I've just got a lot to say about this one. I'll be doing a little intro piece, then I'll be going through the story, and finally, right at the end, I'll be breaking down the text, the messaging, the narrative, and everything else. Because so much of what makes this story good is the mystery it sets up, and that occasional feeling of, where is this going? Something that I always like to see. Oh, one last thing. and this is important, I am going to be playing somewhat with the chronology and the reading order of the manga, as, on rereading this for the purpose of making this video, I realized that the English translation actually gives some stuff away a bit too early. You'd have to be paying attention, but if you are fairly astute, it would lessen the impact of certain mind-blowing pivotal moments later, simply due to the way this translation is structured. So, the narrative will be the exact same. But when you read this thing, you might notice that a few panels aren't 100% where they are in the manga, or that a few extra details are given away. This is why I'm excluding them. Okay, let's do this. Romance, as far as manga goes, is very unique. As a genre, it's comprised of a whole bunch of subcategories and genres, most of which are rather nebulously defined. And LGBT romance actually makes up, quite surprisingly, a good few of these. I'm sure you are all familiar with the term yaoi, gay romantic fiction, generally, well, let's call it smut to be YouTube friendly, but also, weirdly enough, mostly aimed at women, with gay romance stories aimed at men being quite rare and also very much their own thing. However, fewer of you have likely heard of shoujo ai or yuri stories, which involve a romance between two women. A lot of folks interpret yuri superficially as yaoi but with lesbians, and okay, while there was a time that this might have been true, in more recent years, yuri does not necessarily require any sort of sexual relationship, implicit or explicit. Instead, it also encapsulates purely romantic relationships, or even exceptionally strong platonic friendships between two girls that goes slightly beyond the norm without being exactly romantic, whether it be a will they won't they tale, or merely two girls finding refuge in each other due to unfortunate life circumstances, with a whole metric ton of subtext slathered on over it. I guess this might be because lesbian relationships in Japan are, after all, not something often talked about, even though, well, they are out there. And as I have said before, the violently lesbian comedic character is a pretty common trope even in shonen. And no, I have never figured out why this trope exists. If you know, please let me know in the comments. Now, anyone who's watched my content for a while knows full well that romantic plots just aren't my thing. I find romance stories at best trite and at worst intolerable, with irritating tropes, twee characters, saccharine sequences, manufactured conflicts, and predictable resolutions. It takes a lot for me to actually and legitimately enjoy a romantic story or even a subplot. This one, well, let's say sometimes the exception proves the rule, as this is a pure romance story that I will happily admit that I frigging love. Penned by the little-known but still fairly prodigious Kazuki Sakuraba, who is likely best known for that weird Fuse movie, Satougashi is pretty obscure, although it does seem to have recently gained some moderate attention, as folks have heard about it through forums. It's also sometimes categorized as a shonen. Yeah, okay, what? As it's published in Dragon Age Monthly, a primary seinen magazine, likely best known for High School DxD and other ecchi manga, which might be why Satougashi has never really caught on, as it's not something that would be marketed to a male audience normally, and is also in no way even slightly erotic. Dragon Age is, oh holy crap, it's run by Kadokawa. So yes, this is why we've got a long intro, and as they exercise the sort of heavy-handed copyright that, well, Disney can only dream of, you can expect a lot of discussion and Japanese cultural explanations, as this manga is absolutely steeped in modern Inaka or rural Japanese culture, but yes, I need to preserve that fair use appeal, just in case. Lastly, and yes, don't worry, we will get to the story soon. Satougashi is, despite its relatively svelte 2-volume length, a story that packs an absurd amount of, well, story in. There's also a ton of metaphor, symbolism, foreshadowing, and very little in the way of narrative dead space. What this means is that when we get to the end, I am extremely curious to hear your interpretations. I want to see if they're similar to mine, or if you picked up on anything that I didn't. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's take a look at Satougashi. Our story opens with one of our two main characters, Nagisa, although I guess that could be said as Nagisa, I don't know, living in a tiny rural town in, I'm going to guess, central but more likely northern main island Japan. The clues are there, and here, right off the bat, we get our first example of just how much modern Japanese culture is going to be injected into this story. A lot of folks see Japan as, well, Tokyo and Osaka, hyper-populated metropoli full of lights, opulence, young people, tourists, and cosplayers. Only that's a tiny part of Japan. See, most of Japan is filled with basically nothing. Endless stretches of forest and wilderness, where you can drive for an hour without seeing another human being. Here and there, the forest will give way to rice fields, and then maybe a tiny town. There are hundreds of these dotted around everywhere. The sort of place you're more likely to come from than voluntarily go to, as within them, you likely won't find many people between the ages of, say, 15 and 65. We sort of see why, as Nagisa, along with the other students, are filling out their career aspiration cards. Japan is a bit different to the West, as so far as it pertains to this sort of thing. If you, for instance, want to be a lawyer in Japan, it's not as simple as working hard in high school, taking some loans, and going to university. In Japan, and I am deadly serious here, you have to have your career picked out by, well, maybe your second year of middle school at the latest. The reason being, your career will be determined almost entirely by the university you attend, and the university you attend is determined by you attending one of that university's feeder high schools, for which places tend to be in rather short supply. And this creates a situation where young teenagers are put under a ridiculous amount of stress, traveling all over the country to take entrance exams, do interviews, give family histories, I'm serious, and more, in the hopes of getting into a good high school and thus a good university. And this counts double for kids in the country. If you're not one of the lucky few that gets in on a sports recommendation, which is very rare, you'll be spending a ton of money traveling around, and then, if you get in, you'll probably be leaving home at 15 or 16 to go and straight up live alone in a city. And this is why the trope of the high schooler having their own apartment is a common trope in anime and manga, believe it or not. Outside of this, well, you're going to be doing farming, working in your family's business, or if you're lucky, maybe working at TDK or something if they have a plant nearby. Of course, you could always join the SDF. which does tend to have recruitment and training camps set up in the country almost certainly for this exact reason. Anyway, Nagisa knows this, but doesn't really have any aspirations herself. Instead, she wants to join the SDF, which is basically the Japanese army in all but name, long story, but also in its own way, it gives kids a family, as it's a sort of family unto itself in Japan, and thus a lot of troubled or aimless teens, especially Inaka teens, tend to find their way into the SDF. Nagisa says that what she truly wants are bullets, and this is our first bit of symbolism here. What she means is hard truths, the real world, rather than dreams of the future or sweet lies people tell kids about their future prospects. Yes, bullets will be a running theme in this story. We also learn that she has a crappy home life. Her father died at sea, and his insurance didn't cover much, leading her mom to basically have to go and work a bad job basically all the time, and leaving Nagisa as a latchkey kid at 13. Another thing about Japan, some people see it as a kind of socialist paradise. It's not that. There are welfare and pension systems, but these are incredibly overused and underfunded, and this is only getting worse. Nagisa, as it so happens though, does have an older brother who is... I said we'd be talking a lot about Japanese stuff, and okay, let's go through this fast. He is a hikikomori. You can look into this yourself, but let's just say that our term shut-in is fairly close, but not quite there. A lot of young people in Japan, due to bullying, mental illness, and addiction to some form of escapism, but honestly, mostly due to the extreme societal pressure placed on middle and high schoolers, essentially withdraw and primarily live in their rooms, spending their days playing video games, reading manga, and watching movies. Their only real interactions are online. I had a friend whose daughter became a hikikomori at 16 and was still one at 22. And he would introduce her as the family's third cat, with a mixture of affection and frustration. I might talk more about hikikomori in another video if people are interested. It's a fascinating but sad concept that has already had a lot of literature written about it, including full-on academic studies. Anyway, her brother's actually a really nice guy. He's handsome, he's intelligent, and was once popular, but something happened that we never find out much about that caused him to withdraw. It's a whole thing, and it really gives us an insight into why Nagisa wants to leave home and, to her mind, find her place as an adult in the real world. The next day, Nagisa's class learns that they will be getting a new transfer student in from Tokyo. Transfer students aren't exactly uncommon in and of themselves, but this sort of case is actually very unusual, and even mildly alarming for the faculty, more than likely. Of course, amongst the students, it immediately sets the cat amongst the pigeons, with tongues wagging all over the place, not just because said exchange student is quietly beautiful. See, a family moving from the country to the city is nothing especially strange. In fact, it's happening more and more, with basically everyone who can afford to leaving, whether it be for metropolitan centers with more jobs and better pay, better schools, better life prospects, or just more young people for their kids to socialize with. However, a family moving from the city to the country, especially a wealthy family, generally implies some sort of scandal. It may be infidelity or divorce, but it could also very easily be serious delinquency on behalf of the child. Of course, this isn't always the case. There are, naturally, families that move to the country for a quieter life, or perhaps more commonly, either to take care of elderly parents, or to move into a family home that they've inherited, but it's still definitely cause for gossip. The new student goes ahead and does her self-introduction, writing her name on the board, surprising the class and shocking Nagisa. Keeping in mind, before I explain this next bit, Nagisa's father died at sea, presumably by drowning. Okay, so, as I have said in other videos, names in Japan are a bigger deal than they are in the West. Parents or extended families will likely spend weeks or even months carefully selecting and debating not only the name, but the kanji characters making said name up, with the goal being to give specific positive meanings, and also to remove any sort of bad luck, negative inference, or unfortunate combination of characters that would be easy to make fun of. The transfer student, however, writes her name as Umino Mokuzu. And yes, any of you that can speak a bit of Japanese just sucked air through your teeth. Because, oh boy, Umino means from the sea, and Mokuzu can mean, depending on context, bits of seaweed or drowning at sea. It's a name that is somehow both pretentious and really cruel. It's like calling your kid car accident or slamming your balls in a kitchen drawer. What am I on about? Anyways, it's just a weird, pretentious, and bad name. However, the other students provide context. It turns out that Umino's dad is Umino Masachika, another odd name, with Masachika meaning something like trustworthy. He's a washed-up one-hit wonder musician, known for his one and only hit song, the title of which translates closest into The Bones of the Mermaid. It's a bizarre and sort of edgy song about, well, eating a mermaid. And yes, I'm aware there are a dozen Metalocalypse fans about to make a Murmaider joke in the comments. Mokuzu is an odd duck. She walks with a limp, she constantly drinks insane amounts of water, and she tells the class that she's a mermaid, giving a eccentric story about her being here to learn about the human world, which leads everyone to basically call her Fushigi-chan or oddball. But this sets Nagisa against her as her polar opposite. This rich, pretty, spoiled girl is able to live in an absolute dream world because everything is provided for her, especially as the class seems to be absolutely enthralled with Mokuzu, including the boys, especially the boys, for, I guess, obvious reasons. And here we have the immediate contrast between our two main characters, with Mokuzu being Candy, aka someone that lives a sort of fantasy dream world existence, lies essentially, and Bullet's Nagisa's truth and desire for the real world. However, things quickly get odd. As Mokuzu trips and falls, Nagisa spots odd markings on her legs that might be dirt of some kind or perhaps some kind of strange birthmark. However, Mokuzu sees her, well, seeing, and proceeds to cuss her out from a dizzy height, telling her straight up to go to hell. It turns out that Mokuzu, despite her eccentric and apparently easygoing nature, is also kind of a huge, well, bee with an itch, ignoring people trying to talk to her and just walking away sometimes, or just telling them to piss off. And yeah, you can sort of see where the romance aspect of the story is going to go, especially if you are well versed in the romantic genre. We have the troubled tsundere main character and the eccentric but good-hearted love interest. Yup, you think you can see where this is going to go. Sure enough, It turns out that Mokuzu is actually pretty interested in Nagisa, despite or perhaps because of the latter's evident disdain for her, trying to follow her despite her limp and striking up a conversation. Mokuzu is curious as to why Nagisa, unlike basically everyone else, isn't fawning all over her. Nagisa tells her that it's because she's not a bullet. Vis-a-vis, she's not real, not someone who lives in the true world. Immature, perhaps. Spoiled. She does, however, ask Mokuzu about her limp, and Mokuzu predictably gives her the whole mermaid spiel, saying that it's part of the spell that lets her walk on land. And okay, if you aren't familiar with the original Little Mermaid story, maybe go and read the Wikipedia on this first before we continue, because that story ties heavily into this one. Basically, a mermaid struck a bargain with a sea witch that she would get to walk on land to pursue the prince as her one true love. However, she would be in constant screaming agony, and if her dream of marrying said prince didn't come true before a particularly large storm struck, she would turn into sea foam and vanish, because mermaids don't have souls. In the original story, spoilers, the mermaid does not get her wish and does wind up dying, but realizes that she now has a soul due to striving and, if I remember correctly, ascends to heaven. Sure enough, we see Mokuzu's wish. She wants to find a real friend. Someone who doesn't just want her for fame or her father's money, and for this reason, she has chosen Nagisa, who is understandably iffy about all of this, especially as Mokuzu continues to witter on about mermaids and her wish and how she needs to make it come true before the storm comes, and finally Nagisa decides that no, she cannot stand this girl, and walks away as fast as she can, with poor Mokuzu hobbling after her. At home, Nagisa finds that she's kind of troubled and winds up chatting with her brother, revealing her own very odd and conflicted feelings about him. He is a burden, but also a weirdly ethereal existence that she cannot help but love in her own way. She views him almost as a modern-day noble, and yeah, this is another reason why she wants to join the SDF. It does pay pretty well, and with the money she'd earn, she could support her mother and her brother, the latter of whom seems entirely unsuited to life in the real bullet world. We see that school continues much the same. Mokuzu hounds and pursues her, Nagisa continues to reject her, the other girls steadily grow to hate Mokuzu, likely due to the fact that the boys are still constantly chasing her, in particular a boy called Kanajima who asks Nagisa to set them up on a date, and the other girls resort to spreading rumors about the reasons why Mokuzu and her father moved all the way out here. Umino agrees to the date, but only if Nagisa goes with her and Kanajima, to which, likely hoping that the two will pair up and Mokuzu will leave her alone, sighs and reluctantly assents. We also get to see, oh boy, this. Nagisa is in charge of the school rabbit hutch, which seems to be one of the few things she actually enjoys doing, and for some reason, this provokes another bizarre story from Mokuzu about how rabbits are in fact the mortal enemy of the mermaids, which, yeah, as with basically everything in this story, keep it in mind for later. At home, Nagisa discusses Mokuzu specifically with her brother, and, astute as always, he tells her why she might both hate Mokuzu and still kind of find her interesting, in a metaphor comparing Mokuzu to candy bullets. Useless fantasy, dreams, fabrications, lies, and all the various things that Nagisa has cut out of her life. This does, however, sort of make Nagisa realize that, yeah, she is kind of starting to like Mokuzu despite herself. Later, we get to meet Masachika, who appears to be resentful and just kind of a shallow douchebag, and it doesn't take long to realize that he and Mokuzu have kind of a strained relationship, especially when, presumably after the two argue, he basically drives off and tells her to walk home. Nagisa gets roped into a discussion and Mokuzu tells her that she's here to buy a machete, which, yeah, this has to be a Higurashi reference, right? When Nagisa asks her why on earth she would want a machete, she jokingly tells her that her father needs it to chop up a body, which irritates her further, as it's a very Mokuzu answer. And, yeah, Japan is such an odd place. If you get caught with a butterfly knife, you might as well have been caught with an Uzi. But you can buy stuff from your average gardening store that wouldn't look out of place on Jason Voorhees. We also get our first real insights into how Mokuzu and Masachika's relationship might be a bit more unhealthy than simply a teenage daughter and her single father not seeing eye to eye all the time. Mokuzu describes her mother as a washed-up actress who actively tried to turn her against her father and then abandoned them, with Mokuzu describing their relationship as her fighting her mother for her father and winning. Oh boy. Electra, paging Dr. Electra, Dr. Electra Complex, can you hear me? Okay, I'll end the bit. And that said, as the two part ways, Nagisa does note an uncomfortable and vaguely ominous dissonance between the image of the attractive, well-dressed young girl and the huge machete walking off into the distance. Yeah, as you will see, one of the many reasons why I love this manga is just the sheer amount of clever foreshadowing and the genuinely foreboding atmosphere that's built here. We know that something isn't quite right with Mokuzu, but as the audience, we can't really do anything about it. Take note, all of you aspiring writers and comic creators, you don't have to beat your audience over the head with foreshadowing while still building one hell of an atmosphere. And yeah, the next bit is where things start to gradually pick up. The date goes ahead, and it's kind of a weird one, with Mokuzu predictably ignoring Kanejima completely and instead basically snuggling up to Nagisa in a platonic way. Oh right, if you're wondering about all of this, the reason Nagisa came along and Mokuzu requested it without Kanejima going, huh? Or am I in for a threesome? Is because this is kind of how first dates go in Japan, especially amongst more conservative people, which is the norm in the country. You don't just invite a girl out with the two of you being alone. You need what amounts to a chaperone, generally in the form of one of her friends, and sometimes in the form of one of yours as well, to keep her friend company too. Or you just go out as a big group. It's a whole thing, and yeah, this took some time getting used to when I started dating over there. Anyways, they enjoy the movies, and there's this whole thing about secret rooms that, I'll be honest, I don't really get, and it never seems to amount to much in the plot anyway, aside from being kind of a red herring later. But the two do end up bickering more over Mokuzu's nonsense on their way home, when she claims that she can literally disappear from a room by transforming temporarily into seafoam, once again referencing the Hans Christian Andersen tale. Sure enough, Mokuzu takes her back to her lush and enormous house and tells her to watch closely. She then enters her house, slowly closes the door behind her, and with the last light of the sun dipping below the horizon, and the "it's the end of the day, go home kids" siren alert begins playing. Yes, this is actually a thing in most small towns. Nagisa suddenly experiences yet another wave of inexplicable but intense foreboding. As the pair stand there, they realize that, while this is almost certainly a trick, they have now both been pulled, albeit likely temporarily, into Mokuzu's fantasy world despite themselves. And this next sequence is just, oh man, masterful. Doesn't even begin to describe it. They enter the house, which, yeah, for Japan, a country where even a good house looks pretty humble on the inside, this place is bonkers plush, and they immediately notice that Mokuzu's shoes are not by the entrance at all, as would be the case in every household in Japan. Seriously, it would be as unthinkable to walk around inside a house with your clodhoppers on as it would be to go shopping in your underpants. They begin exploring the enormous house, and again, Nagisa keeps getting this strange, ominous chill whenever she sees certain things without being sure exactly why, especially the bathroom with a huge bathtub. Looking for Mokuzu, she enters said bathroom and immediately catches a brief but sickening whiff of a dreadful odor that she compares to the seafood section of the grocery store or the marketplace, which, yeah, in Japan, these places can be pretty rank and smell like fish stewed in ass. Fish ass. She peers in and sees the machete that Mokuzu bought. It's been mostly washed clean, but there are still stains with something that Nagisa thinks might be blood. What the hell? She finds herself immediately thinking back to Mokuzu's silly excuse about cutting up a body, only it doesn't seem quite so silly now. She heads out and, even more mysteriously, despite there being nowhere that she could really be hiding or have given them the slip, Mokuzu is nowhere to be found. Just that weird, fishy reek and a cold atmosphere. Nagisa realizes that she's starting to get more and more quietly freaked out. Yeah, see what I mean? This manga, man, I have to give it props. The tension and the way it gradually creates a certain mood is just so good. And this isn't even the best sequence. Regardless, unable to find her frustrating friend, and likely more than a little bit upset because of the distressing events of the evening, Nagisa pulls herself together and begins walking home, only to see a familiar shape waiting for her at the bus stop. Nagisa, pretty pissed, straight up asks Mokuzu how the hell she did it, with Mokuzu saying quite casually that she just turned into sea foam as she had promised. This likely combined with having her bullet mindset shaken by a very strange and inexplicable set of events in and around the house causes Nagisa to completely explode at Mokuzu, basically telling her to get stuffed, and this absolutely shatters the poor girl. We do get confirmation that it's almost certainly this, a reaction to Mokuzu creeping Nagisa out royally with the machete and rattling her bullet mindset with the Vanishing Act. But as she pleads for forgiveness, Nagisa calls her a liar and, yes, thanks Freddy foreshadowing, says that if her father had really murdered someone, he'd be arrested by now. Or maybe the actual murderer is Mokuzu herself. And this naturally causes her to cry even harder, trying to re-establish the dominance of rationality in her own mind. Nagisa jokingly offers an alternate hypothesis. Maybe the body was actually an animal that had been killed. Perhaps the family dog? Mokuzu appears to grasp onto this straw and tells Nagisa that she's totally right. It was her dog that died, which surprises and annoys her even more. This was almost certainly a trap to see if Mokuzu would come clean or just jump to an easier lie. She gets yet more annoyed when, as usual, Mokuzu begins to embellish the story further, saying that it was her dog, Pochi, which, as far as dog names go, is so unbelievably trite that it's almost non-existent outside of fiction. It would be like actually naming your dog Fido, and apparently Pochi was hit by a brick thrown by her beloved father in a fit of rage, and he then hacked the body up and took the body up the mountain with him, even writing a letter simply saying goodbye Pochi, all of which very much comes over to Nagisa as incredibly stupid and childish, the sort of tale a preschooler might concoct. And this causes her to snap, basically say bugger it and give up on their friendship entirely. Rather than continuing to argue, she falls silent, turns around, and begins walking home in a frankly heart-wrenching scene, despite the pleas of the obviously unstable Mokuzu who follows her. Finally, sick and tired of all of this, Nagisa grabs Mokuzu's wrist and, in an attempt to get her to stop lying and just admit the entire thing was more candy, i.e. her fantasy world stories, says that the two of them are going to go up the damn mountain together, right now, no matter the hour, and that Mokuzu is going to show her the dog's grave, or, better yet, just admit she was lying so they don't have to. Predictably, Mokuzu doesn't want to, and thus we get a twilight panel of Nagisa hauling the sobbing Mokuzu up to the hiking trail with darkness falling all around them. We also get a wonderfully foreboding bit of text saying, from Nagisa's perspective, that what happened next she would never forget. And I'll be honest here, I don't think you will either. As the two of them make their way up the mountain, which, okay, it's likely not actually a mountain as we think of the term. It's probably more like a pretty big hill, and they're definitely not going to go all the way to the top. This is a common turn of phrase in Japan. This is almost certainly just going to be a maybe 30 to 45 minute walk up a well-trodden hiking trail to some kind of overlook. But regardless, as they go, Mokuzu goes from crying to gradually perking up again for some reason. We then get a brief but really important interlude. Yeah, as with frigging everything in this story, keep it in mind for later because it's going to come back in a big way. Sometime previously, we watch Nagisa's intelligent but offbeat brother tell her that he wants to try a sort of thought experiment on her and that she needs to answer a question at the end of it. He also says that it would be bad if she managed to answer correctly. I honestly think that I've heard this one before in some context, but I might be misremembering. It kind of rings a bell. Let me know in the comments if you know this one. The story goes as follows. After his death, a widow meets a man at her husband's funeral. The two get talking, hit it off, and she falls in love with said man at first sight. The widow then goes home and, that same night, proceeds to murder her young son. The question is, why? Why would anyone do such a thing? Nagisa tries a few guesses, but has no idea, and her brother, Happy, says that this is for the best. See, according to him, this story is an actual, real-life evaluation test given to teenagers who the police are worried might be or will turn out to be serial killers one day. Psychopaths, essentially. And the handful of kids who have answered this correctly have gone on to be exactly that. Uh-oh. Sure enough, Nagisa, likely a bit concerned, puts this question forward to Mokuzu. She, however, says that she doesn't know and thinks that it's actually a riddle of some kind, which comes as a huge relief to Nagisa, who was likely worried that she was potentially hiking into the forest at night with a psychotic teenage machete serial killer. But she finds that she's actually somehow disappointed for some reason. I think that what's going on here is that Nagisa is starting to question her own ultra-rationalist mindset, realizing that if you believe in nothing intangible or even unlikely, it means that your world will become a little cold and grey. And yeah, this will continue to develop as a theme as the manga progresses. In turn, Nagisa actually starts almost playing along with Mokuzu's candy, trying to jokingly freak her out by saying that her brother is actually a ghost, her home is a ghost's forest, and that she is its caretaker. And all of a sudden, she realizes that this night walk is turning out to be rather enjoyable for them both. As the two continue up the trail, bantering back and forth happily and having a great time, with Nagisa coming out of her shell a little bit and Mokuzu now significantly more relaxed. Despite her limp, the topic turns back to Nagisa's hikikomori brother. We actually do, to my understanding, get our one and only glimpse of what might have happened to him. He was a popular, handsome, extremely kind and funny guy. But one day, a female classmate, for some reason, forced herself into his room. And while Nagisa has no idea what happened, as he refuses to speak about it, he immediately disengaged from society and has barely left his room since. I think I might have an idea, but there's no way I'm going to say it on YouTube. Why don't you all debate it civilly in the comments? What do you think happened to Nagisa's brother? Either way, the walk seems to be the tipping point, and we see Nagisa going from basically warring with Mokuzu to being, I guess, exasperated with her, to the two now straight up bonding, especially when Mokuzu, really unexpectedly, shows her an astonishingly beautiful but somehow melancholy view of her small nighttime town. And yeah, the art in this manga, while it's not what I would call mind-blowing, can be really damn good on occasion, and the almost surreally lovely atmosphere created in this panel alone is amazing. We get some stuff about how Nagisa sees the town as a metaphor for her own heart. I honestly don't follow this bit. It likely makes a lot more sense in the Japanese. But this moment really does show both the contrast between the two girls and how Mokuzu is starting to change Nagisa for the better. Think of it this way. The view is of the real world. Her small, ugly, grimy town. But from a different perspective at a different time of day, it's almost fantastical and kind of lovely. Yeah, this is a very, very good manga. Regardless, the two continue talking about her brother, with Mokuzu saying that he sounds like a great guy and that Nagisa is a truly wonderful sister. While she dismisses this as more candy, she realizes that she doesn't hate it anymore and is actually grateful for Mokuzu's words and sympathy, whether they are 100% true or not. It's almost like an actual friendship. Two characters leaning on each other to help them deal with their own real personal problems. Both in their own ways have crappy home lives, life hasn't worked out the way they'd hoped it would, and they feel kind of alienated from the rest of the world. Regardless, as the two start nearing the end of the trail, Nagisa sighs and realizes that Mokuzu is becoming visibly uncomfortable again, almost certainly because she knows soon she will need to come up with some excuse for her lies, and that this will probably break the spell of this wonderful nighttime walk that they've enjoyed so much, and maybe the armistice between them. Instead, to Nagisa's surprise, she points a finger at what looks like an old mound of dirt, perhaps a waystone of some kind, and tells a skeptical Nagisa that this is in fact Pochi's grave. Yeah, you're getting in deep here, girl. And sure enough, still really skeptical, wondering if it's just a random pile of rocks, she begins to approach. Yup, this moment scared the crap out of me. I physically reared away from the screen when I saw it. What she thought was a heap of stones was actually the large, hacked-up carcass of a dog, its head lying on top, staring out at the world with dead eyes. And on top of the corpse, a crudely scrawled, dripping note, which indeed does read, "Goodbye, Pochi." Nagisa screams and vomits as we begin to realize that it was all real. Oh crap. As a frantic Mokuzu tries to calm her friend down, she tells her that Pochi was alive and well until they met at the supermarket. Nagisa notes that the handwriting of Mokuzu's father was childlike but passionate. Not what you'd expect from an adult at all. Very, very odd, and more than a little disturbing. Then, okay, this next bit is kind of hard to follow, and honestly, it's not the only part of the manga that's like that. So here's my interpretation. Nagisa asks Mokuzu why her father would do such a horrible thing, and when, rather than telling the truth or spinning another tale, Mokuzu vacillates, refusing to answer. Nagisa then realizes something. Maybe thinking back to what Mokuzu said about her mother, for instance, and wonders if, maybe, it wasn't Masachika who killed the dog after all. And this causes Nagisa to immediately run away in terror. Mokuzu follows, likely guessing her suspicion, and tells her that it wasn't her, it was her father. Not sure what to believe, Nagisa slows down and decides to believe her friend. The two make their way back down, and Nagisa, seeing that Mokuzu's cold, offers her practical cardigan to wear, which prompts Mokuzu to nearly break down in tears. Yeah, this is a Yuri story without any overt physical intimacy or even romance, which is honestly kind of thankful due to the ages of these characters, but the subtext is 100% there. Like, if this had been a boy giving his jacket to a girl, we would all know what's going on, right? Regardless, Nagisa realizes that, despite her wealth, her beauty, and her popularity, with a potentially dog-killing monster for a father, Mokuzu is, in her own way, even worse off than she is. As the first volume winds down, we get a brief interlude with Nagisa's brother that's mostly foreshadowing. Essentially, he offers an explanation as to how Mokuzu did her sea foam vanishing act, saying that it probably was just misdirection. She knew that the go home kid's siren sounds at sunset, and that she also might have guessed that Nagisa would have been momentarily distracted, long enough for her to duck back out through the door, close it, and run off. You do realize that she's not Batman, mate. Regardless, this closes out Volume 1. I would recommend that you go take a break, get a coffee, or more preferably a stiff drink before the next one, well, assuming that you're at the age of majority wherever you are, because Volume 2 is where things start to get interesting. Anyways, chaps and chap pets. At this point in the story, What do you think is happening? Are things as they seem? Is Mokuzu just a bit of a weird girl with an utter bastard for a father? Or is she hiding something? Are there maybe some supernatural shenanigans afoot? Or is Nagisa just getting drawn in by pure candy? What exactly is their relationship going to evolve into? And how is this all going to end? Either way, as the storm draws closer, I will warn you, at this point, some of the stuff to come will be very, very difficult to forget. Before we finish for the day, I want to give a huge thanks, as always, to my fantastic patrons: Cheddar, Piece of Yeast, Elspresso, Cheerful Satanist, Starwin Marwin, Question Man 6, Kel Core, Jacob Ramsey, Crazy, Opinion Custard, Wargle, Hunting for R2D2, Inukie Koji, Rose Montgomery, Lance Goebel, Rafferty, Erin Arnold, The Hedgehog Gamer, Simone, The Empress, Jake, Ranger Danger, Lucian, Andrew James 82, Polite Crow, Cheshire Quill, and Squid. If you want to see more like this, why not stick around? Subscribe, bell, you know the drill, all that good YouTube stuff. If you want to hear me say your name, get on the credits list, as well as getting early access to most of my videos, 1 or 2 unique videos, some fun perks on the Discord, and help Mrs. Owl and I out or buy Baby Owl a present, and ensure that this channel survives into 2024, why not take a look at our Patreon? If you want to chit-chat about, well, basically anything, drop by our Discord. Otherwise, take care, my friends, and cheers. This is the Owl, signing off.